Okay, good morning. Welcome, everybody. It's a delight to see so many people in the room and also to know that there are so many people participating online. My name's Heather Viles, and most importantly, I'm a geographer. So I'm a true social scientist and speaking today in my role as Associate Head for Research of the Social Science Division. And I'm looking forward to a very stimulating couple of days. As you know, the conference title is Hope into Action. So this is the second conference that we've run in the division on the impact of social sciences. The first one was in 2018, and that focused on how social science research can make a significant difference to societies and people's lives across the globe. But how the world has changed since then, you think of all the things that have affected us over the last 5 years. Obviously COVID-19, but also a whole array of other global challenges, local issues have really buffeted the world and its people. And the world today is a very different place. Also, the higher education system has experienced a lot of churn and change over those 5 years as well. We now have very different organisation, funding, compliance, and support for researchers. And there's increasing support for engagement, innovation, and impact for all researchers. So there's an increasing understanding that research needs to get out into the world and address real world problems. So a consistent theme of the past 5 years, most notably during the pandemic, has been the grit and determination of social scientists across the sector to improve our understanding of these complex challenges and to try and make things better, working with partners outside academia. And working with partners has, of course, been crucial, inspiring, and challenging component of making our research matter. And we'll be hearing a lot more over the next 2 days and hopefully celebrating some of the excellent examples of research carried out by social scientists in many different institutions. So I think in sum, we start this conference 5 years after the first one in a very different place. We've got a much clearer understanding of the complexities of engagement, innovation, and impact. We've got a much more developed, what is often called ecosystem of support of companies, organisations, funding, etc. And we've got many different ways to engage, shaped by experience and opportunities. The digital revolution, for example, has completely changed many forms of engagement. So this event, we hope, is not just going to be a celebration of very good impact, but also an opportunity to interrogate our motivations and biases, to think creatively, to be more inclusive and responsible in our actions, and to set higher and enduring standards for impact practices. We've been truly thrilled by the response to the conference and the excellent programme that Aileen, Becky and their colleagues have put together is a tribute to the community's dynamism and diversity. And I think the next 2 days will definitely infuse, inform and inspire all of us. For example, there's a real concentration of case studies and interest in families, young people and children. There are sessions with case studies and learnings from around the world, including low and middle income companies. There's a lot of stress on responsible, ethical impact and how to balance activism with research. And there's also a lot of stress in many of the activities of the conference about the growing importance of commercialisation, innovation, and gaming as all routes to impact. Now, none of this work that's going to be showcased over the next couple of days is possible without partnerships, and we welcome guests today and tomorrow from a very wide range of organisations, including the Bangla Housing Association and members of the Bangla Research Advisory Group, young people from the Be the Difference initiative, and the Showman's Mental Health Awareness Charity, as well as organisations ranging from Government Office for Science, BMW Group UK, and Migration Yorkshire. And we're, of course, very grateful to our sponsors, Aspect, Oxentia, Oxco and Scriberia, that you'll see more about when you visit the exhibition area. And we'd also like to thank our O2RB partners. That's the Open University, Reading University and Oxford Brookes University, and the Economic and Social Research Council for their ongoing support, especially from Oxford's Impact Acceleration Account, which has generously funded this conference. And as I say, we couldn't do any of this work without these growing partnerships and the continued interest from people outside academia. So I'd like to just finish my introduction with a few practical points. So we welcome all voices at this conference equally, and we want everyone to have an enjoyable experience. So please act with kindness and respect towards each other throughout the conference, including in any online spaces. And if you witness or experience unacceptable behaviour, then please contact a member of the conference team, and they can be seen with orange lanyards. Please do visit the exhibition area from 4 p.m. today for a range of activities, tea and importantly snacks laid on by our sponsors and partners. And do please specifically keep an eye out for Scriberia in the exhibition area. They are live scribing onto an animated wall. I don't know what that means. So I'm really looking forward to finding out. But importantly, they want our contributions. They want your key messages to be put on that wall. So please do interact with Scriberia and we can all find out what that means. So I'd like to end on a real high note. There is a fire alarm test scheduled for approximately 10 a.m. for 5 seconds. Only in Oxford could they deliberately schedule one for the starting event of a conference. So that will be in about 10 minutes' time. So there'll be no need to leave or respond unless it rings continuously, in which case please leave immediately by the signposted exits. In my best plain kind of manner. So I'd like to now move on, both in terms of what I'm talking about and also physically to sit over here to hopefully have a little bit of a different vibe. So this is the first panel of the conference, and we're going to be exploring the question, what role do the social sciences have in creating hope in these difficult times? And what are the key ingredients in turning hope into action? And I'd like to welcome our three panellists who are going to be discussing this question with me. Firstly, Melanie Knetsch, Deputy Director, Innovation and Impact at the Economic and Social Research Council. And Mel leads the ESRC's strategic knowledge exchange and innovation activities, including the impact acceleration accounts, which have funded many of the projects we'll be seeing today and have generously funded this conference. And Mel has been a key driver in developing programmes to support business engagement and commercialisation for social sciences. So Mel, thank you, you're really welcome. I'd like to introduce secondly Tim Vorley, Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Dean of the Oxford Brookes Business School and Director of the Innovation Caucus. Tim's research focuses on entrepreneurship, enterprise and regional economic development. And the Innovation Caucus, which he leads, supports sustainable innovation-led growth by promoting engagement between the social sciences and the innovation ecosystem. And Tim works extensively with government departments and agencies and local government. And finally, Sravya Rao, Deputy Director of Economy and Strategic Analysis at what was formerly known as the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We await to see what the new name is. Sravya leads a multidisciplinary analytical team looking at how the UK can boost its economic growth and productivity by developing the evidence base and policy ideas underpinning the government's economic strategy and exploring how developments in the UK and global economy affect policy. So we've got three very different viewpoints. And I'd like to start off by posing a question to Mel, really, which is, you know, what is the value of social sciences and why are they so important?
Always a great question to ask the funder of social sciences, I guess, in the UK. So for some of you who do know me, I've had many roles in my time working in ESRC and what used to be Research Councils UK and now UK Research and Innovation. And over the years I've been working in ESRC, I'm incredibly humbled by how there isn't an area that social sciences research that people aren't interested in. I used to oversee the Festival of Social Sciences for ESRC, which has had 20 years of running. And again, just the public interest in what research is drawn out there is really constantly humbling how much people are hungry for the knowledge base. But I also have worked across other sectors. And there is also an interest and a need for evidence and insight, but also challenge from what the social science, the methodologies that we bring are really, really important to help people navigate the issues and the challenges that they face and also find the solutions. And the final bit that I've always been thinking about that social sciences is in a unique position is that we often research on sectors or on an area, but we also have to research with those companies or with those businesses or with those departments or with those community groups. And that just gives a very different, interesting perspective because it's all about people and people in our place and the economy and however you look at it from many angles. And I think from an ESRC perspective, over the years, it's become quite clear that we have an important role in this ecosystem, as you were talking around with impact, but we're not the only role within that. And some of the areas that we have a key area to play is if we're designing a call or designing an area, whether you call it challenge-led, mission-led, impact-led, solutions-focused, I'm sure there'll be another term come up some point with a new funding. It means it's about impact, it's about making a difference. And so if we don't design that right, then we're not going to be setting the activities up to succeed and with partnerships. But we also need to think about how we support that infrastructure underneath that. So you mentioned the impact acceleration accounts as kind of a key area about supporting the professional services staff and the people who, who understand knowledge exchange or who have the ability to think around the policy engagement or community space or public engagement experts. I mean, without them, I think impact doesn't really happen. We're also within our team space thinking around how we evidence impact and reward it, because that's also incredibly important for people to understand how you can demonstrate the value of what you brought in back to your own community and understand how they valued it, which I think then is actually quite inspiring, but also potentially leads to further questions. And the other area that we're moving into now very much is how do you sustain impact? And you mentioned commercialization, and what we're trying to understand is the different routes for sustainability. And we often know that impact happens after the grant has ended. It might happen within that local, but other people will find out about it, and they want to understand how they can draw upon that. And especially having worked in the international development space, a really key part of that is how do you support and keep that going in those systems. So I guess just thinking around this, which the conference agenda, I think, really draws upon a lot of those elements. It's going to be a really exciting couple of days. I think my own personal journey is I'm very inspired. I mean, what happens and the impact that you see is actually what inspires us to keep going. But I also think from a social science or somebody who's in research or in the system, most people go in with the ability or the mindset they want to make a difference. And I think that's where the action can come in from, is actually understanding how and where and why you want to make a difference and the support that you need within that space.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting and really good to see the ESRC passionate kind of support for this kind of thing. Sravya, could we move on to you? What are your thoughts about the importance of social sciences?
Yeah, so firstly, welcome. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to just slightly, as I left the house this morning, I was staying at my parents' last night. My dad said, "Are these really the shoes that you're planning on wearing?"
Definitely.
I'm just gonna call it out because I don't want everyone thinking this is a woman that doesn't know how dirty her shoes are. I do know.
Deliberately.
That's right. It's a statement.
Yeah.
It's actually coming back. So I think it's really interesting. So I'm an economist by background. I lead a multidisciplinary team. We've got operational researchers, social researchers, data scientists. And I think what I really value is the ability of those disciplines to help people think through novel problems. And we've got a sea of people making policies, very complicated things, quite a lot of pace, and actually someone who can sit in the room and say, actually, let's just break that down and this is how you look at it. That's a really, really valuable insight. So one thing I would just say is don't discount the value of the expertise and the insight that is sat in your head. Sometimes when I talk to academics, they seem to think they need to have a PhD just to voice their opinion on where the toilets are. You just say what you think. We're really, really interested in how you perceive the world and what your logic is. And actually a lot of that very practical insight on kind of how things work is really, really valuable. I mean, ultimately, what we solve in government is social problems. And they are systemic, and they are multifaceted, and they are deeply rooted. So all of these different perspectives can add a huge amount of value, and we keep evolving the way that we think about things. So COVID has really shone a light on how health and the economy work together, right? You know, we started to really understand the value of people. I don't mean this quite as callous as it sounds, as economic units, and actually the value of health in sustaining people's well-being and their ability to operate into the economy. Similarly, the way that we look at kind of inequality, actually during COVID, it made us think about, oh, you know, we don't really understand intergenerational households. So the value of kind of understanding these different groups in society, how they operate differently, the way the incentives work is really helpful. Social scientists are so good at that. My boss used to say to me, part of the problem with economics, he said, economics lives in the averages, but policy lives in the extremes. And this is where a multidisciplinary approach to things can be really helpful. I once saw a beautiful case study of people talking about Afghanistan and how we can make more impact, kind of as we were supporting the kind of people who'd gone through the deprivation and the after effects of the conflicts there. And actually, we did a beautiful operational research systems map. And they circled all of these things. And they were like, these are the things that are actually in our control. And it just was not obvious, the things that were in our control. And they were not the things that were immediately kind of to hand. So that's what it helps us do. Social sciences helps us take a step backwards and think about, where can we actually add impact? Where is that unobvious? Where can we bring in different perspectives? Where can we look at things, you know, in a way that actually thinks about the whole problem? And you have a role to play in that, whether that is the specific research you're doing, or it's simply that just kind of logic and mindset and kind of all the osmosis of things that you've been picking up and thinking about. And we'll come more to kind of how that has impact. But I think the first thing is that just to say, you know, are you asking the right question? And if you're here, you're sort of already asking the right question, because the question you're asking is, how can I have impact? So, you know, keep going, pay attention, talk to Scriberia, and, you know, don't clean your shoes.
Excellent. So that's the key to successful government research. I made a rookie error then, because I actually did the opposite. I looked at my boots and thought they were disgusting, and so actually polished them. So I'd like you to admire my very polished boots. Tim, over to you. What are your perspectives, and what are your shoes doing this?
Well, they're fairly new shoes. I just checked they haven't got a sticker on the bottom. Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It is interesting, and it's great to be up the hill at Brookes and be contributing and benefiting from the IAA down here as well. I suppose the first thing that I'd say is that when I told a colleague I was coming and they saw the post on LinkedIn, they actually asked what I had to do with hope. And hopefully I will close that loop in a moment or two. But I guess the thing for me as a social scientist and as a geographer, so I'm an economic geographer who I guess has never really been at home in a geography department or a business school. So my career has seen me flip-flop between the two, but there's no hiding in leading the business school up the hill. But one of the interesting things throughout my career has been the shift by the way we do research. So the research with impact, it used to be research on organisations, then it used to be research in organisations, and now it's research with organisations. And that's one of the greatest ways to actually, I think, really think about how we can have that impact. The thing that's got me out of bed is, not just today, but most days, is the research, and it is the ability to drive change with that research. And as I've moved through my career and kind of taking on the role leading up at Brookes, it's about creating a stage now for others to have impact. And I think that that's really important. And when I took the job up at Oxford Brookes, and I'd been at Sheffield previously for about 10 years, I really saw Oxford Brookes as a sleeping giant. There are so many people there doing so many interesting things. Not everyone is going to be at a Russell Group university, but impact and engagement is at every university. And I think that it's really about trying to tease that out and enable that to happen. So that's one of the really exciting things that I kind of get to do, both from a perspective of hope, but also inspiration, the amount of inspiring stories that you see through the research where people are making a difference. I guess the other hat that I have is as an active researcher, and one of the investments that I currently lead, the Innovation Caucus, and If you stick co.uk after that, you can find out a bit more about it. But we work, and we are funded both kindly by Mel and colleagues at the ESRC, but also jointly with Innovate UK. And it's a really interesting and fairly atypical investment, because what we're trying to do is to develop applied insights. And it's about taking those applied insights from a community, a network of 80 academics, how we help translate those, and then how we actually see those make a difference in the world of policy. And I think that I completely agree that the fact that we've got academics here, we've got KE professionals here, is really inspiring. It gives me that huge sense of hope. But one of the things that we need to do is to keep thinking about those that we're talking to. And certainly a lot of the work over the time that I've been doing it with government departments, with Innovate UK, with regional government, and again with colleagues at Oxford in the side, we're currently doing some work supported by the IAA on the space ecosystem. We're currently working towards developing the new economic plan for Oxfordshire, is taking that hope into action. I think that that's why I wanted to speak today and say, yes, I think it is so important. How do we make that shift? And it's often about exactly kind of the point ended on previously, where we need to be asking the right questions. And I think one of the most insightful things that I've ever been told by a civil servant is, I don't care about your research. And the reality is that they don't not care about your research, but they want your research to help move their thinking forward. And sometimes that means taking your research out of the context in which you did it and trying to think in their world and in terms of the things that matter to them. And so the one thing that I would kind of leave you thinking with is, how you do. I think once upon a time, academics in ivory towers could get away with talking across the ivory towers. The worlds that we're talking about now, to policy, to business, mean that we need to change the way that we speak and the points that we make based on the insight that we have. And so that applied insight, the hope that you guys have doing the research or supporting that research, the challenge now in taking it to action does mean thinking a bit differently. But I think that everyone is ready to go on that journey, and through the work that we have, the support from funders, knowledge exchange professionals in that space, and peers, there is lots of support to do that and make that happen. So I do end on hope, and I hope that I've kind of proved my colleague wrong who said that I was at the wrong conference.
Definitely, it's worked for me anyway, Tim. So all three of you then have given us a really positive account of the need for these kind of activities, the huge, urge to be involved in impactful research and the opportunities for it. But could we move on a little bit to discuss this question of what are the key ingredients? And perhaps what are the key sort of processes and things that we need? How do we translate all this goodwill and good suggestions into something that really works? So that's quite a large question. So Mel, can you start us off?
With all the answers. Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because I think there's a lot of ingredients. I don't know what metaphor to use, but when we think about what we need to make it successful, I agree with the ecosystem. There's different elements to it in that space. And I definitely, as I've said, think that there's people in an institution to help. My first kind of reflection point is, nobody is ever alone in this situation. You might feel like you are at times, even in the funding space. So to draw upon my own experiences, when we first had the Industrial Strategy and the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund come out, it was in social science, in ESRC, we hadn't really worked a lot with Innovate UK in that space for a really long, really to understand where we go. And I suppose my first lesson was actually, and Tim has taught me a word in time, which is about my value proposition, which is actually understanding, what do I bring? What can social sciences bring into a space? So I think the first thing is actually thinking about, rather than your research, but actually you as a person. What do you have? What skills do you have? You have a lot of knowledge, but you also have a lot of ways of thinking and aspects that other people really value. And understanding where you add value into a space is really important. And I think the second one, because I know that there's other people on the panel to speak, I think the other one is to also allow yourself to unleash your creativity a bit. We talk about unleashing innovation, but I think having a creative approach or thinking outside of your own comfort zone, I think is really important, which also that includes who else do you speak to. I think hearing some of the aspects about what the Oxford Festival of Social Science has and how how they were creatively engaging with communities and children, etc. It's quite interesting how many researchers really get into that space, whether there's a giant octopus that we've heard about on display, or whether it's, creating quizzes or games for people. How you think about how you translate something. So open up your creativity. So understand what you bring, but then think about how to bring that across.
Yeah, I mean, that's really excellent advice and reflections there. And I think that's something that researchers are often not very good at. We do tend to hide in our comfort zone. So I think that's maybe something we should all start to practice today, is moving out of our comfort zone and thinking about what it means to translate things and the opportunities that gives us as individual researchers to grow and enhance our creativity. So it could be a win-win thing, couldn't it? Definitely. Sravya, what are your reflections?
I actually was trying to think about this in a really practical way, thinking about the way that we do policy. So the problem with being on the outside of government is that it seems like this big amorphous blob, right? Very impenetrable, full of jargon, and you'll read things on, the web ROMF cycle and things like that if you try and sort of click into a website. And I think none of that really reflects the reality of how we make policy. I think the first thing just to remember is take the world as it comes, not how you think it ought to be. So number one, civil servants are unbelievably time poor. And I would extend that to anyone that you're talking to, whether that's people in business, people, in research councils, just so what is your elevator pitch? This is what I'm thinking, but also why do you care about that? Why is that important? Who are you? What is the decision that you can take or the course of action you can take with that information? So think about who you're talking to and what it is that they need to take away from that message. And the punchier you can make it, the better. Someone I really admire is Torsten Bell at the Resolution Foundation, who all of you will have probably heard of. But what I really admire about him is it's not just that he does really good analysis, it's that he knows how to land his analysis. He's a fantastic communicator. So watch his style. He comes out with really punchy tweets, nice little series of tweets. He's got some graphs, he's got some insights, and then bang, he lands it, and so this is what you should do. So that's the first thing. Are you a good communicator? The second is, are you on the right platforms? Because I'm telling you, civil servants don't read academic journals. We just don't. I recently did a master's, and it was the most excruciating experience of my life, having to go back to read economics papers with sort of dense lines of maths in them. But the world is, in the last 15 years, the amount of academics that are on Twitter, that write blogs, that do podcasts, these are the ways that real people, no offense, sorry, get their information. So think about how you can tailor your message and move into those kinds of spaces, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable, and get training and ask for advice, talk to these business engagement people about how you do that. And then what are your hooks? Is there a policy review going on that you think, oh, I've got something that can be really relevant for that, or a conference or a person you can go to talk to? How is it that there is a time and a space for you to make your work relevant? So think widely about that and how you can land your point. Two more points. I promise I will be really quiet in a second. One is think about where your channels go. So some of it is just this thing about shouting into the ether and making sure that the right people hear your messages. But there are ways you can be more systematic about that. What are the tenders that departments are putting out for research? So you can see the kinds of things they're interested in. What is the guidance that we put out? Because I promise you, if you change one number in a piece of Treasury guidance, you just filter out automatically to all of these departments. You don't need to talk to all of them. What are all of those different ways that you can integrate into the world of kind of government analysis and social sciences? And the final thing I'd say is, as well as this idea of, there's work that's based around here at the punchy policy recommendations, the other thing is how can you help government analysts like myself think differently? So maybe that's you develop a really interesting tool or a model that we can play with. Maybe it's something like the visualization that we can kind of play around with. Maybe it's a channel, an insight into a channel around how something works or a systemic issue. If we understood, for example, how businesses make decisions, that is a game changer. That cuts across everything. If we understood how to improve state capacity in a world of limited resources, that would cut across everything. If we knew how to improve investment in businesses while we're trying to get them to do net zero and improve their skills. And again, so think about what are the systemic issues or the things that everyone needs to be paying attention to. So that's really, it takes effort. but I promise you that's how you land your point. And then so instead of going back and noodling with your research, think about all the stuff around your research that you need to do to get it into the right places.
Really, really powerful, and I love that expression, noodling with your research. I think that's what a lot of my life is spent, noodling around the edges. But really good issues here of being prepared to make these contacts in ways that people want to listen to. And you know, for all of us who are researchers and educators, knowing our audience is a really crucial thing. So thanks for reminding us that.
That was a much more succinct way of saying it. Know your audience. That's really what I was trying to say.
But you said it really well, and you gave really good examples of how we might do that. So Tim, no pressure, but
No,
those shoes have got quite a lot.
That help, yeah. I'm just mindful of not putting them in it. I suppose the first thing that I'd say, which is probably counterintuitive to the conference, is that you don't all need to have impact. It can be that you work with people that have impact. It's a team game. And I think that the interesting for me, the perspective on social science is that it has long been played as an individual rather than a team sport. And I think that by working in teams and understanding the relative strengths mean that you can actually have an impact with your work, working with other people. And absolutely, you need to have that item that is on the hook that we know that policymakers or businesses are interested in. And I can certainly help hook up afterwards on the what businesses making decisions piece might look like. But I guess kind of moving forward and thinking about the way that academics work, the academic output has to make a contribution. And I think that the thing is that we need that same clarity that academics need when they are to publish in journals. When it comes to having, as Mel mentioned, the value proposition, what is the value added when it comes to the impact piece? Policymakers being time poor, and it's certainly the kind of thing where I have felt the wrath of that, where if it's not interesting, if it's not insightful, if it's not relevant now, then they haven't got time. But what I would say is that policymakers, businesses, third sector organisations, if you've got something interesting to say to them and you've got your foot in the door, they will make time to listen. And I think that it's trying to, again, land that message, understand, don't go in there naively thinking you've got something to say. I think in the same way that people will finesse or noodle with their research, that it's about the same thing. You would never go into a meeting with a policymaker or a business not understanding the challenges that they face and what they want out of the meeting. And I think that kind of the biggest thing for me has been marrying that interest between what I want out of it and what I know that they as partners want out. And I think as soon as you think about them as partners rather than pathways to impact, all of a sudden you have this kind of really interesting shift in mindset. And I think that it takes investment. It's not the kind of thing. I think the Innovation Caucus has been funded now for about 7.5 years. We are now at the point where we are managing the expectation because we're getting more demand from Innovate UK's side for more and more questions. But we've had to prove ourselves. We've had to show we're a trusted partner. We've had to show the value of our research. And that takes a huge amount of time on top of, and I think that this is where things are slightly changing, it definitely started as on top of the day job. And I think that what we're increasingly recognising now, and not everywhere recognise it, it's still imperfect, but career progression, the value of impact is beginning to be recognised and regarded in different institutions to different degrees. So I don't profess that this is perfect, but I think that there is that recognition, and the value of that is only going to keep increasing. And if it is going to keep increasing, it comes back to that point that you can't keep doing everything as an individual. You cannot be the 5x4 world-class researcher and be having world-class impact. I sit here knowing that I've got a team of people that are funded and some of whom are working as collaborators on projects, which enables that impact to happen. And that again takes a lot of time, and it means that you need to not be thinking about the impact that you want to have tomorrow, but you need to be thinking about that impact in 2 years' time, or how a piece of research is going to be evolving. And the final point that I'd make, I guess, on the kind of tangibles, and there's both pros and cons, and many of you will be familiar with the research funding challenges and JES, which is fortunately on its way out. But I guess the interesting thing is that we lost the pathways. Meant that we lost impact. And what we need to be thinking about now is how we articulate and think about impact, not as a bolt-on to an end of a project, but from its inception at the beginning. So I think that there are definitely people we can work with who can support us. I'd say that while Mel is here, and if you have the opportunity to talk to colleagues from the Funding Council, talk to them. Provide input in feedback, what works, what doesn't. There is now funding out there to support impact in a way that there wasn't kind of 10, 15 years ago. And that is one of the keys to enabling this to happen, because I think everyone recognises the gestation period to impact. It's not immediate, but it is a long game. And I think that it's trying to make sure that every other game that academic colleagues need to play, whether we're talking about REF, engagement with KEF, compliance with TEF, that we are also thinking about the things that matter to us. And like I say, the research gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what I'm interested in doing. But it's that longer game in terms of trying to leverage and maximize the research that we're doing for change, which kind of excites me. That's where, when you see that penny drop, I think it really is rewarding.
Lots of really good points there, and I think I particularly like your points about the importance of thinking about it as a team and the kind of a long game, not something that has to be achieved instantaneously. I really appreciate that point about having the confidence to talk to people from research councils, government departments and things. That's something that even at my aged stage of the research career, I'd never considered, that you could actually just reach out and say, I've got this good idea or whatever. But also bearing in mind, Sravya, your really good point that you're all time poor. So that's really important. But also, Tim, you've raised the other important issue, which is how do we reward people for taking this bolder, this impactful, this kind of more complex research seriously? And that is a challenge for the university sector, I think, to respond to that. So I'm going to give the audience a little bit of time. If there are things that you want to comment or points that you'd like to raise or questions that you've got for our panel, then there will be an opportunity in a couple of minutes. So please do think about things. And I'm particularly looking for research partners, early career researchers and whatever to be bold and put your point forward. So just giving you a couple of minutes to do that. And in the meantime, what haven't you had the opportunity to say? Are there things that you still want to make a point? Mel, start with you.
Yeah, I guess I was mentioning about the early engagement with Innovate UK on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and I think my biggest reflection I had to de-social science my language. Very much so when I was speaking across, and that was quite a challenge, is how do you talk about the value of social science as a social science background without using any social science language? But what I also found is that my colleagues in Innovate had to desectorize their language back to me. But I found that process really helpful, because that's a key part as well about within your audience, but also within yourself. And the less you rely on the language and the more you can express, the what you bring and what your insights, the actionable insights as well. I think that's really important. It's actually almost a helpful journey, because I now understand how to speak to business CEOs when I probably wouldn't have known that quite a few years ago. I understand sort of what questions to ask. And I think the other of not only are you not alone and you're part of a team, but actually a lot of universities and institutions have pathways into helping policy seminars. There's so many opportunities where something is already set up that you also don't always have to create something new. And I think that's also useful, is understanding what opportunities there are that already exist within your university or within a connector. So the knowledge, the KTN, they're now running a series of business seminars drawing on social science research. If you've got something to say, there's people that are doing some of these as well. So it's about connecting in with people. I think we're just two other thoughts that I had around my own journey of how do I create partnerships so that therefore you can then create partnerships.
Excellent, thank you. Sravya.
I think sort of linked to your point about actionable insight, I just wanted to say one thing I think is to really be aware of the constraints of policy delivery when you're coming to sort of to government or anyone in the public policy space, public sector space. So I'll make a couple of points around that. So one is things like, is your idea going to cost £100 billion if you actually put it into practice, or have data requirements, or require engagement from society to a level that is just simply unfeasible? So what's the version of your idea that can exist in the real world? And you can sort of learn by that, by thinking about, being curious about politics, or talking to people in government or around people like the KTN, other people who have sort of more experience in that space. The other thing I think is sort of not letting the best get in the way of good enough. And I think this is, what are the insights and the actionable insights you can draw out without being too worried about the perfect read across. So one thing, I mean, when I did my master's, which was in public policy, we talked a lot about randomized control trials as the kind of gold standard. And I was like, this is very interesting, but I can't remember the last time I actually saw anyone in government do a randomized control trial. That's just not the way that we operate anymore. But there's more in the way of, that second order thing of, natural experiments or kind of generalized insights you can draw, or looking at where it's been done elsewhere and how you can translate that into policy. So don't wait for the perfect policy environment. Just think about what you can pull into it. And the other thing I think sort of linked to that kind of point about, let's draw a distinction between statistical significance and economic significance. So again, you might have a great study or a great experiment which shows that this has had a really impactful insight. But if you actually scale that out, if really what it means is that 10,000 people have a slightly different sort of outcome, or it has about £20 million worth of impact, it's probably not what government's going to be thinking about. So what's the scale of that? And those smaller things do have their place. So if you're working a local context, or if you're working with a particular business, but just again think about what it is that you're bringing to different kinds of people, and kind of and what the scale of the thing is that they're looking for, or where they want to target it. And there's lots of different variables within that, like their budgets and their interests. So yeah, I'd say the delivery is really, really important. Operational delivery, how you get it done on the ground.
Tim?
I completely agree that perfect is the enemy of good, and good is probably better than what most people have already got. So it's trying to kind of recognise and think about that in terms of the landing. I suppose a couple of other points. The first one is that there is no right way to do this. And I think that it's being sensitive to the context, understanding what your strengths are, what other strengths are in your team, and what is being asked of you or asked of the research you're doing, and trying to think about that. The other thing is, and it's all well and good, and often when you see someone sat on a stage, you think, God, they've done really well, or they've had a successful career. I could tell you about the amount of failure where it hasn't worked, the funding applications that haven't worked, the research papers that have been rejected, and the research papers that have been rejected that have actually turned into great impact. So it's trying not to think about what you put in the desk drawer and forget about because reviewer 3 has offended you, but actually what you can take from that and what you can leverage and kind of reposition it. And that's actually been part of the really rewarding, I guess, journey of my career, is that you learn from those failures, you learn from other people, but you do get to work with other really great people on that journey as you reframe and you develop it. And I guess kind of the final thing that I'd end on is the challenges around career progression and expectation. I think that there is a need, and as someone that is not only leading a business school but is part of the university executive, I think there's recognition increasingly around those university executive tables as to the value of this. When we look at the value of ref impact case studies, and not all engagement and all impact has to be ref impact, but I think it is appreciated, it is acknowledged, and those things are changing. So you do not always need to conform to what were the rules of the game. I think the rules of the game are changing, and actually it's the people in the room that are going to help change the rules of the game further. And that doesn't mean doing one or the other, it doesn't mean doing all of it, but it's making sure you're doing the right thing at the right time. And the one thing that I guess I would advocate for is doing it well, and being true to what you're interested in. Do not try and have impact where you're not interested. Do not engage where you don't need to, but actually it's trying to kind of think about how that feeds into what you want from your careers. And my challenge, and Heather's and others in kind of leadership positions, is aligning the individual interest with the institutional need and the institutional interest. And that's kind of one of the challenges, which is why I came into the role that I wanted to be in now.
I'm very mindful of time, so apologies. This kind of session always raises more questions than it answers, and that's our duty over the course of the couple of days now, is to continue these discussions. I was asked to sum up, and I can't possibly do that, and I don't have time to do that. So I'm going to pose a challenge to all of you. I want all of you to leave the room with one word or one phrase which you've really taken away from this session. And I want you to contribute that to the Scribera exercise, so that we're feeding them some of the things that we want to take away. So just think about that. Think about the one word or phrase that's really meant something to you from the discussions that we've had. So I'd like to thank all three panellists, Mel, Tim, Sravya. Thank you so much for being willing to sit here on a rather gloomy Monday morning. Thank you to all the audience. We've now got 10 minutes before the start of the next session. So please, if you're leaving to go to another session in another room, make your way there as quickly as possible. If you're staying here, just be tolerant while they get set up for the next session. So thank you very much.
Thank you.